All right. Well, we should be live. I'm just going to give a second to catch up here on YouTube. All right. We are officially live. Thanks so much, Shashank, for joining me tonight, all the way from New York. How is your evening going?
It's going well. How are you doing, Ben?
I'm doing good. It's actually light over here. I see Stark over there, so I'm gonna enjoy that. So for anyone who doesn't know about kind of who you are, what your background is, do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, so my name is Shashank Kalanithi. I'm a senior data engineer working at Bet Fanatics. We're a sports betting company. And I graduated with a degree in chemistry, transitioned my way from that to data analytics to data science to data engineering. So outside of like machine learning engineering, I think I've hit the major aspects of the data ecosystem. And I've like deployed some machine learning algorithms, but never gotten to like the really nitty gritty that like a machine learning engineer hits. And I guess DevOps, you could say like ML ops is something I haven't hit either. But the diversity of experience, I think, gives me a decent chance of giving people good advice on stuff that might be useful for them. And then on YouTube, most people probably know me for my YouTube channel, which I launched a couple of years ago, and I'm hoping to get back to sometime soon.
Yeah. It's like I know you've got like a few really popular videos there. Which one was like? It was like something where you did like an analysis for like an hour or two. I feel like it's the one that really blew up.
So basically, this was in 2020, I think, and I'd seen a bunch of these videos of like, oh yeah, I'm a Twitter engineer, I'm a Google engineer, and the video, the way it was crafted, like the people that I'm talking about, they crafted the video such that it was like, do these people actually do any work? I'm like, okay, well, let me show people what people actually do in the industry. And so, I showed them for like an hour and a half, like some of the transformations I would do on a data set using Python. And I got super lucky. The algorithm caught on to it. I'll take maybe like 5% credit for seeing a gap in the space, and 95% is just the YouTube algorithm smiling upon me.
Yes. I mean, like, to be real, like that's the same, that's still a constant problem today, right? Like, it's like any day in the life video, it's always like, woke up at whatever time. If it's someone who's actually productive, it's like 6 a.m., worked out, took the bus, ate food,
meditated,
had a meeting,
yoga, and they're very detailed about all these things, right? Like, oh, I did this pose in yoga, but like when it gets to work, they're like, and I worked and I wrote code, and I'm like, what did you write? What were you building? What product are you working on? And like, I understand that people can't, talk about this stuff, but then, why would you advertise your video as a day in the life of like, say a Facebook engineer or something like that? I think in 2015, 2016, it was pretty cool. Like I remember Mayuko and Jomatek did their videos like years ago. And at least back then I wasn't, aware that this, like there is a lifestyle that can be achieved when you work for these companies. So back then it was a lot more interesting, but now it's kind of like, everyone's aware. So let's see what you actually do.
Yes. I think that's a good way of putting, I think in general, it's like you saw a hole in the market for anyone out there who's ever like, oh, everyone's already built all the content exists. There's always holes in the market, because what we all do as content creators unavoidably is we somehow, either through like just looking at other people's content and we're like, oh, this is popular, we should make content on that, or just because it's in the zeitgeist of the moment, we all start creating kind of similar content. And then one person maybe that hasn't been creating content sees a hole and is just like, hey, let me try to make content in this space.
Yeah.
But yeah, so you came from you had a chemistry kind of degree. How did that like eventually lead essentially to data analysis?
So I think the journey was very interesting. So I got a chemistry degree. I was going through the normal path a lot of people with my background go through, doctor, pre-med, and then realized that like I just have no interest in being in school until I'm 30. Not to criticize people who become doctors, just saying that you have to be you can't do it for the money, becoming a doctor, because there are way more efficient ways to make money. You truly have to do it for like the love of the science, and the love of the craft maybe. And the money is just like a byproduct of like all the like endless hours you put in. Like, because I like to tell people, if you put in the same amount of effort that a medical student puts into like, becoming a doctor in America, especially, into any number of careers, let's just say tech, for example, you will make way more money than a doctor, most likely. Save maybe some top surgeons or something like that, right? that's kind of the way I see it. So, I got the chemistry degree, realized I didn't really want to do much with it. And like a bachelor's in chemistry doesn't really amount to much. It doesn't, won't really get you anywhere, quite honestly. You need a master's or a PhD at least.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, what can I do with like, my bachelor's degree? And I just happened to fall into an internship at an IT, in the IT department, hated IT, could not stand it. And then like look for any work in the firm that was not in IT, and happened to fall into supply chain analytics. And that's where I got into, I was using Alteryx and Tableau.
Nice.
Yeah, for my first two tools, right? So Tableau, the BI tool for anyone that's not aware, and Alteryx is kind of like a replacement for Python or SQL. Or it can do a lot of what Python and SQL do for data analysts and engineers, except it's a GUI interface. And then after that, I, went to another company, got poached by someone who moved companies. But then I realized in the job market that Alteryx was very few companies really look for Alteryx talent. Like you have to know SQL. Like everyone just uses SQL or Python, right? Like a company would rather pay the extra $20K to hire someone that knows Python or SQL, because these are standard tools that like they don't have to pay a licensing fee and deal with Alteryx to like buy. In fact, at the time, right, this is like 2019 maybe. The only company that I saw that was that were looking for data scientists or analysts that use Alteryx was Ford, like the Ford Motor Company.
Oh, yeah.
Everyone else was like, yeah, you got to know SQL or Python. So, I picked up those two skills, and then, here we are.
Yeah, I think that's why it's always interesting when people ask, like, what should I learn? And it's like, I mean, like, honestly, if you learn SQL and Python, like, whatever tool you'll need to learn, you'll likely pick it up on the job, right? Like,
SQL and Python, you can do any data job to a minimum level of competency.
Yeah. And most places will interview on that too, because exactly. It's like you said, it's standard. It's what everyone's using. Obviously now you can just cheat and drop everything into ChatGPT and be like, all right, ChatGPT, how do I answer this question I have to answer for this whatever? I think one of the things that you talked about that resonates is the fact that you moved laterally. Like a lot of people are like, oh, how do I get maybe not even a data analyst job? Like I'm a data analyst, I want to get a data engineer role. And one of the things I usually tell people is like, hey, you should try to move laterally because moving inside your company might be easier than trying to convince a new company that you're competent. So I think that's something that was a smart move. I imagine. When you say IT, I'm curious, were you just kind of stuck like provisioning laptops and things like that?
It's stuff like that, right? Like, so I think unfortunately, right, like what I like to tell people is, why do some people make a ton of money and other people don't make that much money? And I like to be very open about money because I think many people, at least in America, I can't speak for other countries, but many people in America, a large number of their problems could be solved if they just knew how to make more money, not all of them, but a large number of them. And I realized when I was working at my first company that a lot of people just thought that working in IT meant you would get a good paying career. But the thing is, in IT, there are a lot of jobs that do not pay significantly above minimum wage. I'm talking like maybe $10 to $12 an hour. This was in Dallas in 2019, so it's a little bit different. It's probably a little bit higher now, but so I was kind of like in that like area. And then I also realized that what I got placed into was ERP stuff. So enterprise resource planning. So for anyone that's not aware, Oracle, SAP, these companies sell these massive pieces of software that basically handle all of the supply chain related to sales is probably the best way to put it. Like all your like really base levels, like accounting and stuff is handled in the software. Like you have like specialized software and stuff like that too, but ERP is kind of like the pipelines of data in your business for your core business data. Like the stuff that gets like reported to auditors and stuff like that. And ERP software is great and all, and like, you do have opportunities over there, but I wanted to get into something that was more, I didn't want to marry Oracle or SAP. If you're working in ERP, you're basically going to marry one of those two companies. You're going to learn all of their technology. You're going to be deeply involved in their stacks, and your job prospects will live or die by how many Oracle and SAP jobs just happen to be available at a given time. And quite honestly, because of all the certifications involved, anecdotally, I've noticed that you're competing with a lot of people for a limited pie. Versus for, Luke's out, you're like, can't stand SAP. Yeah. I mean, and I'm like that with Oracle, quite honestly. What's up,
Where are
Luke?
you getting? Oh, okay. I was
I
like,
have
where
a
you
chat
at?
open.
I just saw the message. It took a second for StreamYard to pick it up. It's funny.
Um,
Yeah.
so when you say IT, right, that's kind of like what, and I'm not. I should be very clear. Like what I say, a lot of it is personal preferences. Some of what I say is like just to be blunt, the truth. Like certain IT jobs just do not pay very well. That's like so just because you work in IT doesn't mean you have a good job. So don't just aim for IT. Aim for something specific in IT. But yeah, like the idea of marrying something so like it is big, but it's not as big as it could be, and there's a lot of competition globally. Quite honestly, my family's from India, and I know a decent chunk of people in India like are certifying on all the SAP stuff and all the Oracle stuff. And you don't want to compete in that pool if you live in the United States, for example, because it's a labor pool that is willing to work harder than you for less money than you constantly, just by numbers, like it's the Indian market is a hyper competitive market. It's much more competitive than America. So that's why I wanted to avoid IT personally.
No, I think that's smart. I think what's interesting, right? Like if you're on the old, like I don't know what the old Oracle SAP like type roles pay, but I know like for example, like sales, like there's like the ERP, but there's also kind of CRMs which have like some similarities, some like generally integration points. So like if you were a Salesforce developer, even now, if you're a solid Salesforce developer, like you could make boatloads of money if you're really good. Same thing with like Workday. That's why like I think it's like certain consulting. I remember watching a consulting video where the guy's like, oh yeah, like I worked for like I don't know if it was McKinsey or whatever, and they like sent me to Workday trainings. Then suddenly I was making way more money. So there definitely are some systems in there that if it's the current trend that every consulting company is currently implementing, you can make a boatload of money, and there'll be a new one probably in the next few years. It's like, okay,
Well, I would
everyone's
also
implementing
say
this. Go ahead.
with Salesforce, right? So there's a lot of people who come from somewhat disadvantaged backgrounds. You can become a Salesforce consultant without a bachelor's degree because of all the certifications available and because of the number of people they need for these things. So if you come from a background where getting a bachelor's degree is either very difficult or impossible for you, then a Salesforce admin, Salesforce roles, and getting these certifications can be your route into IT. And then from there, you can jump into like a regular developer role. Like, the people who are paid most in technology, well, first of all, quants, then below quants are your software developers, ones that code in like Java or C++, or even Python, quite honestly, if you get the right jobs. So, if that's kind of like what you're looking for, getting those jobs is hyper competitive though. So like Salesforce, I have read a lot of very heartwarming stories of people that have escaped very rough neighborhoods because they hunkered down, got their Salesforce certification, and found a job that paid them $80,000 to $90,000 a year. It's not mind-blowing money, but that'll get you out of a bad situation,
Yeah, I mean, when the average American salary is like $50,000 or $60,000, it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing money. Like for some people, it is mind blowing money. That's what's
exactly. Yeah,
it is one of those crazy things. That's like, if you've been working in tech for like a year,
you
obviously
lose so much perspective. Oh my god,
you're like, what is $200,000? That's a normal. That's what
excuse
college.
Me, the TC is not high enough.
yeah. Maybe that's not the case anymore after the last year, but. Is that what kind of led you, I guess, like from data analyst to data scientist, data engineer? Were you kind of like looking at work that you were wanting to do? Were you kind of looking at work plus income increases? Like what was kind of the shift there?
It's kind of a combination of the two, right? Like I used to have a quote I used on my YouTube channel a lot. There's no such thing as a $200,000 data analyst. And what I mean by that, right, is there is a very, very small number of data analyst jobs that will pay you a base salary of $200,000. But there's a lot of engineering jobs that'll do that. There's a lot of data science jobs that'll do that. Again, like what that communicated to me is that from a technical expertise perspective, I really wanted to get into either data science or engineering. And data science and engineering, they use they're for two different types of people I found, like data science, in its truest form is very much like a science. You can be given a problem, like a problem statement. You can spend months researching it and not have an implementable solution. What you get is we cannot implement a solution within any reasonable budget, right? And many people like that. That is what science is, right? Like what is a drug discovery, for example, outside of people spending hundreds of millions of dollars trying to create a drug and then finding out that like 10,000 different methods don't work for it, right? the reason I went into engineering, or one of them, right, was like, one, the pay is higher than when I was an analyst, and two, as an engineer, you put stuff into production a lot more often than most data scientists do as a function of the job. Now, the downside of that, right, is, for example, data scientists don't get put on call. Data engineers get put on call. I'm actually a secondary on call right now. So fingers crossed, pager duty doesn't go off. But yeah, if you guys have any questions about like on call and how that stuff works, like let me know.
Yes, luckily like at Facebook, I was internal engineering, which I picked specifically to not be on an on-call that's like, hey, 3 a.m. pipeline fails, you got to fix it. It was more like 3 a.m. something broke. All right, we'll wake up tomorrow and fix it first thing. We're not going to like, try dealing with it in the next whatever. It's 3 a.m. I'm going to sleep. But yeah, I remember actually having a friend. So like when we were still kind of like in that phase of life where like you do like kind of college parties, right? Like where you'd like all hang out at someone's apartment. And like they had their Amazon laptop and like something happened and they're like, I gotta fix something right now.
If you go to Seattle bars, they're just like people with their backpacks and you're like, oh, you're on call. And they're like, they have like one drink they're nursing the entire night because they're like on call. I will say, one of the things I've like kind of learned about life, right, is that, and this is going to sound kind of grim, but stay with me here, but like collective group, for lack of a better term, kind of suffering builds camaraderie that makes life a bit more interesting. I remember like in college, for example, the dorm I got placed into, my first dorm, was the crappiest dorm in the entire university. But because it was, all of us like became much better friends than a lot of people in other dorms because we all just like sat in the common room because we hated our room. So we sat in the common rooms complaining about it. But it built some camaraderie, right? So I've noticed like amongst engineers that kind of, you have that camaraderie as well, where it's like, yeah, I'm on call this week, boys, I can't do anything this week. So
yeah, it's like if you ever go to a data conference and go to any of the happy hours afterwards, it's definitely a little bit of like group therapy where everyone's like, well, here are the problems we're all dealing with right now. So yeah, but also another point that resonated with me is like kind of that your whole feeling, and I think this is why a lot of people pick data engineering, was like the whole like putting things into production. Because I remember having that same thing, because the first job I worked at, I was kind of like this data analyst. I was occasionally poking at like data science stuff. And I like spent all this time researching this whole project on like patient readmissions, and then nothing happened, right? I was like, okay, and what do I do with this? Like, where's it go? What is it like? What's the purpose?
Right.
So when I went to the next job and we did like fraud detection and things like that, and someone did all the research and then I was implementing it. It was like, oh, I built things that are now making money for companies, right? Like they're actually doing, like they're actually somewhere doing something and delivering. And I think that was something that was like, yeah, this is the thing I would prefer doing. I don't want to just research something and hope someone uses it. I would like to see it in production long term. So yeah, I mean, like, how's the switch been? I think you've been there for a year now. Like, how's the switch been?
Approximately, yeah. I think it's been awesome, right? Because so I don't have a CS degree, and I've never like done a coding boot camp or anything. I just kind of like learned by myself. But there's a lot of I've heard the term best practices is not something people like anymore. It's not in vogue anymore. So I'll call them better practices. There's a lot of better practices I've learned. I have two engineers more senior than me. One in particular, she's very good about doing very thorough code reviews. I have no idea how she's able to pick out this like these like very like small things in my code, but her code reviews are very, very good at helping me become a better developer. And it's something I appreciate because one thing so I come from a supply chain background. And the first people I worked with, they were big Six Sigma guys, like Lean Six Sigma. And when you work in like meat space, right? When you work in like quote unquote the real world, right? Unlike software engineering, you can't like create and destroy worlds, instantly, right? So because of that, processes have to be like a lot more tight, and they have to be a lot more precise, and they have to be a lot more airtight, basically. Precision is a lot more important than in certain forms of data engineering, or certain forms of like software engineering. So I do appreciate that there is this attention to detail that I personally have seen certain engineers don't have, because the cost of failure in software engineering can be very low. Because if something goes wrong, you just, revert the change.
Yeah,
And it's like nothing ever happened, depending on the systems you have, obviously. But yeah, I think code reviews have been something that have really improved the quality of code that I write. I realized I've become a lot faster at it. And I remember there's this, I coming from an analyst background, I might be able to bring in some unique experiences of like, oh, I know what the other side of the tracks is like. Let's like, really see what we can do to help our analysts and like make, data cleaner and better for them.
Yeah. Yeah. I remember my like, essentially she was like the director, but we were a small company, like same thing. Like she would look at your code for like 5 seconds or a design that you were proposing and like 5 seconds to be like, what about this?
That'll
Exactly. Break. That's not going to work. And you're just like, oh yeah. And that's why like it can kind of be fun for like the first 6 months if you work for a team that like has no engineering culture whatsoever, right? Like I'm learning, I'm doing all this stuff. But then like the only reason I find that valuable is because then as soon as you move into a team that has some level of engineering culture and better practices, like you just get trashed. You're just like for the first like 2 years, you're just like, there's like, this is you need to improve everything. Like,
right.
Really, this is not good. So I think that's like one thing, if anyone wants to like really, improve their code quickly, you can build as many, like building personal projects is great to get started, but like to really improve your code, you have to find a company that like has engineering culture, that has people that like care about code. Cause like you said, like blameless culture is so like prevalent in our industry that it's like, it's so easy just to make a mistake and be like, oh, we'll just run it back. It's fine. It's fine. But like, we should care a little bit more. So yeah, working with those people, it's always like enlightening and exciting to a degree because they love it.
It's like any system, right? Like the blameless culture on one end is at least, so for example, like I think everyone remembers when Facebook, I refuse to call them Meta, when Facebook had that issue where like, because they network everything together, like people couldn't get inside the building. And one of my friends works at Facebook, and I was like, "Oh man, who got fired? Like who got canned?" And he's like, "No one, right? Like it's a blameless culture." And the thing I appreciate about that is the logic behind that is that there should not like the automated systems should not have allowed people to push that code into production. Like this should not have been allowed to happen. And once you bring in all the people who failed to allow this to happen, you fired like 30 people, it doesn't benefit anyone to do that. You might as well maybe reprimand people, but keep it fairly blameless and like actually improve the system. So, but yeah, to your point, I also hope that doesn't mean that people lose rigor, like a blameless culture doesn't mean you lose rigor, in my opinion, even though I think some people think that's what it means.
Yeah. It's just easy because it's like, oh, well, what's the cost? And in the end, it probably will eventually impact you. Maybe it impacts you via like promotions or things of that nature. But it's just more interesting than anything else. That I do remember that, like when no one could badge in. The other example I think they usually give is like this story of like, I think it was like an intern who ran like some sort of script that was supposed to take down like one server, but took down like an entire like server farm and like took down Facebook for a certain area of the country. And it's like, yeah, but we should have code that doesn't allow that, or we should have scripts that like make sure that
why was an intern allowed to push that?
So there's other reasons, and so yeah, it does drive interesting improvements rather than like making sure you like, hey, you've made a mistake, or you're fired. It's like, okay, now no one's going to do anything interesting because
there's that, and like then people don't experiment, right? Like what is one of the best things about America? Like this is something people don't normally think about, but one of the best things about America is Chapter 11 bankruptcy. In America, we have bankruptcy laws that are a lot more lenient than many other parts of the world, like Europe, for example. A lot of European countries do not have as lenient bankruptcy laws as we do. But because you have Chapter 11 in America, we allow failure to exist in a contained box. I think it's like 7 years stays on your report, such that failure does have a cost, but it won't ruin you forever. That way, the entrepreneurial spirit in you is not killed. So you need to make room for failure.
For anyone who doesn't know, if you ever see Shashank at a bar and want an interesting history fact, he has endless amounts of facts and stories. So
if money wasn't a thing, I would be a historian.
Yes, I think that. Well, first of all, there's a lot of really interesting history channels on YouTube. I'm sure, I don't know how much they make, but there's this one British guy. He's got like 10 channels One's called like side projects. One's
Mhm.
called like it's tons and tons of like videos. And he just like has someone write scripts for him. I think they just use him because he's got a British accent, right?
Oh, that guy. Yeah, the Simon guy. I know who you're talking
Yes,
about.
yes,
Yeah.
yes. And like he just like reads scripts. And I'm like, this is amazing. This is amazing. This is an entire channel. So you could probably make a ton of money. You just need to love it to that level. Like you're just not at that level. And going back to your doctor's point, right? Like there's like whatever, or not doctor's point, analyst point, right? Like there's probably like whatever 1,000 jobs in America that are data analyst jobs that pay over 200K. There's probably 30,000, data engineering jobs that pay
Yeah.
over 200K. There's probably 3 or maybe 10 opportunities to be a history channel that pays a decent amount of money.
Yeah.
And then everyone else is just,
Well, and then YouTube has like, like unfortunately the advertiser bias against history channels. Like if
Oh,
you talk about like history is controversial,
okay.
like history is difficult to talk about. And so unless you want to avoid entire sections of history,
Mm,
you're going to run into videos that get demonetized. So if your videos have any oomph to them,
that makes sense. That makes sense. Taking it back to like data engineering, you referenced earlier that you don't have a CS background. You're having to learn a lot of this stuff. Where did you start, like, to pick all of this up?
So for engineering, right, I came into the position with skills in Python and SQL. So like I know how the languages work at a good enough level to figure most things out. Then from there, what made it a lot easier was when our staff engineers started picking out our tech stack. Because I remember I was one of the first employees to join in, and then they asked me to like build out some stuff and like design some stuff. And like without the requisite pre-experience, I couldn't give good advice, quite honestly, on like, let's do this and do this. So when the staff engineers came in and they put like a skeleton together, then I can start like adding flesh to the skeleton, right? Like I can start like, oh, okay, you guys want to use Apache Airflow. Okay, I can start researching that. I can figure out what that is. And from there, I can reason out what the next logical step is. So, and quite honestly, that's what staff engineers are for, right? Like, it's the experience more than anything.
Yeah.
There are some staff engineers that are like elite, like mega elite, extra hard level coders. But that's a very small minority of them. Like the majority of staff engineers are staff engineers because they have excellent experience and they can make judgment calls that are with relatively little information and still get them right most of the time.
Yeah.
So once those staff engineers came in, it made it a lot easier to learn what to learn. So for example, AWS, like learning how to manage AWS, learning how to manage Apache Airflow. One thing that we ran into a problem because we use this thing called a MWAA, which is a managed workloads with Apache Airflow.
Yeah.
And the blessing and the curse of a managed system. So when I say managed, for anyone that doesn't know, that usually means a cloud provider manages your server deployments and everything, right? Like you basically just have to use the tool and they'll manage everything else. The problem with that is that, for example, Amazon just upgraded to Apache Airflow version 2.4 or whatever. I think it's like at some other version right now. Amazon Lambda functions, you cannot use Python 3.11 on them. 3.11 is important because it has a lot of speed fixes. Like it's significantly faster than the other versions of Python. I think like 30% faster than other versions of Python. So learning what happened was, the reason I brought that up is when we used Apache Airflow, we started running into problems of, why when we have 200 tasks, are they not running in, at all? And these are very, very light tasks. It's like each task should take like 2 seconds to run. And then we find out that the Celery executor, which is, like with Apache Airflow, you have like an executor, we're just getting completely overwhelmed with it. So then you start learning about things that you can start learning about. Now I know how the executor works. I know how to optimize around it, how to optimize like our task distribution. When should we vertically scale? When should we horizontally scale? So that's where you start learning stuff. And then the thing is, I do a little bit of engineering around my social media as well. So my Instagram, I make sure to regularly search up coding stuff on Instagram, even though I use it to follow my friends and stuff, right? But by searching up coding stuff, it advertises to me other resources that I can use. So like one resource that got advertised to me that I think was quite useful is Powerful Python. And it is a good book on the like impactful patterns and features, like when developing systems in Python. So, these kind of like design, like making yourself available to absorb information is very useful. Going to like meetups, talking to consultants are a wealth of information. So, those are kind of the things I would suggest.
Yeah. No, I think it's funny with the, I'm kind of trying to do the same thing with my like Instagram reels where it's like, all right, if I'm going to get stuck on here, like I might as well try to give me something useful at the very least. Yeah. It's, cause otherwise, it's funny. It would be interesting if like in the future, like you can like fully learn things through like micro doses of just like tiny, 30-second clips. Like I'm trying to pick up Mandarin right now. It's not working, but no, that's funny. What was I thinking? So I guess in terms of kind of going forward, like where do you are you going to stick with data engineering? Like how do you see that kind of playing out in the next few years for yourself?
I think so. Quite honestly, I really enjoy engineering. I probably will try and like add more science to what I do. And here's the thing, right? Like what I found out is once you secure the bag, right? And by the bag, I mean like, the salary package, right? The pay package. In my job, I can do whatever I want. So for example, like if I want to do some data science work, like no one's really going to stop me as long as I get my engineering tickets in. So the way I kind of think about my job, right, is that I need to interview in such a way that I can secure, a certain pay package. And then from there, I mean, if I want to do data science work, I totally can. I just have to make sure I finish my engineering work as well. And the data science work will add value to the company. And it'll be probably different value. I'll differentiate myself from other people because most engineers can't do science work and, vice versa, at least to, a certain level of skill. So that's kind of the way I think about my career. Like, find a way to make sure you can secure a solid pay package. And then like, what I like to tell people, I've heard this excuse, I don't know, maybe it's an excuse, maybe it's not, but I've heard this kind of thing from people where they talk about like, oh yeah, but when you get paid a lot of money, people expect a lot from you and like you become like, golden handcuffs and everything. And I'm like, sure, that is a thing. But I've also kind of noticed, especially in the tech field, highly paid employees are also the ones that are given the most freedom to determine their schedules, to do what they want to do, because it is assumed that you will get the work done. And if you don't, you get pipped and kicked out, But for anyone that doesn't know, PIP means a performance improvement plan or something like that. It's basically what companies do before they fire you to make sure that you don't file a civil suit against them. So I think I'll stick with the engineering because I think it gives me the most flexibility because it keeps me in an IDE, it keeps me in a coding interface. And from there, I can do analyst work if I want to. I can do data science work if I want to. As long as I'm adding value to the company, I have not found anyone really cares what I do. As long as I get the work that I promised to get done, and I add value to the company, I can do whatever I want, quite honestly. And I found that applies to a lot of other people too. Like they just want you to add value. That's all.
Yeah, especially like, I mean, regardless if it's, I think a lot of that mentality came from like the FANGs and I say FANGs, so that means like any generally tech company, Stripe, Uber, right? Like that was their mentality. They're like, look, do what you want. As long as at the end of the day, the fact that we're paying you whatever, $250K leads to us making $1 million per employee.
Exactly.
We don't care, right? Like we don't care. And obviously there's pros and cons, and obviously that's kind of why we're seeing the whole disruption in the tech industry right now, where it's like they could honestly keep hiring employees. Like I remember doing the math at Facebook, and like I think they made like $40 billion the year that I left. I was like, net, right? Like that's net. And I was like, that guy could have paid all of us employees, like I think like an extra $200K, and still made $20 billion.
Yeah.
So it's one of those things where it's more of just a shift in mentality, and like they now need to maybe shift in terms of like from growth to being more of a stable company.
The downsizing was necessary too. Like I have a friend that works in HR consulting, and I asked him about this, and he like showed me a graph. He's like, basically Google hiring, Facebook hiring. He's like, these companies doubled in size in like 3 years. Like there was no way that anyone thought that was sustainable. And I'm like, okay, I mean, that's fair. They should not have hired that rapidly. That was just a bad, like, because let's say you even, let's say you go from 100 to 200 employees. Let's say you need to do that, right? You can't do it in such a short amount of time because the organization can't absorb that many people that quickly and maintain stable processes. It's just not possible. So even if they needed to expand more slowly. And that's just the irresponsibility of the organization. That's the irresponsibility of a business that has not seen a downturn in over 20 years, you know? Like if you're Google, you've never seen a downturn before because you came after the dot-com crash, the 08 financial crisis, like who cares? Like people need to use Google. And you know, Facebook, same thing. And then, you know, with all the money just being pumped into the economy, like that money, like you can find a way to suck up that money somewhere. So, honestly, in the way that rising interest rates are a good thing and that they are bringing some reality checks to the economy, honestly, I say this in a very privileged position because I wasn't directly affected by the layoffs. These were kind of bound to happen. So
yeah, no, it's again, we were in a soft environment there for, I mean, for both of our entire careers, right? Like it's like
yeah.
But what money's just, it's always like 2%, right? And then I'm like I think I talked to you earlier, just looking at houses, and it's like the amount of interest I'm gonna have to pay is like, dang, all right.
Oh yeah.
Dang, all right. Well, and you think you're like, that's not that much. It's not like a huge percentage. It's like, no, it adds up fast. So that's fun. So you're gonna be in engineering for the near future.
I think I'll be in data. That's probably what it is. My title will say engineering, and I have a focus on data. Like basically, I use code generally to bring value to data. That's probably what I would describe myself as. And I keep myself flexible that way.
I think that's kind of important because I often get asked, and I think someone even asked this here in the chat. So like, you know, do you believe that data engineering positions are more secure compared to those of data analysts or data scientists? And so I think that question comes up a lot. Like, oh, will data engineers be around in 5 years? Will all this stuff get replaced?
I read your article.
Yeah. Which one? The what I want to see in 5 years, or
data engineering will not exist in 5 years. It was, the wording was something like that.
Something. I also just I think recently posted about this because I was, you know, thinking about data engineering like maybe 10 years ago. It was like Hadoop, MapReduce jobs, right? And like you think before that, it was like data engineering didn't exist so much as a title, but when it came about, you know, that's kind of where it started. It was like a lot of MapReduce, some Amazon Redshifts. Then we're like, well, okay, writing MapReduce jobs is dumb. It's hard, right? Like, so it's like, let's make this simpler. Okay, what if we put Hive and Presto on top of it? Okay, we've simplified that. Cool. Or you have Snowflake and you've abstracted it that way, where you've got some sort of like massive parallelism going.
Everything's in SQL. Will charge you $1 billion trillion for it.
Yes, but you don't have to pay like 10 people. So that was like the first thing, right? Like we've abstracted that thing. Everything's in SQL. Then, right, in this next kind of shift, where people are kind of trying to poke towards the fact that everything's SaaS. Okay, well, what if we just made things that can pull from those SaaS things automatically? Okay, so that's why a lot of solutions are coming in that space, right, and pulling from the core kind of SaaS apps. Next, I imagine things like maybe data modeling could eventually be slowly like automated away, or even the way we model can shift now that like storage is cheap. So how we modeled before can in theory kind of shift because a lot of that was done due to kind of limited storage. So then there's that kind of shift. And then eventually maybe you can slowly start to automate analytics, maybe with like a ChatGPT layer. And I say ChatGPT, an agent, LLM, whatever you want to call the non-specific agnostic version of that. But one, we're very far away from that, right? Like we're just now figuring out like how do we get rid of like writing code for API connectors. We're still having to write a lot of them. Or a lot of it. So we're still in there. So I don't think
there's so much basic stuff that still has to get done, you know? And people always look at like FANG and are like, oh, this is where the industry is at. FANG is not even remotely close to where the industry is at. Like you work in consulting, 99% of companies are not even like, they're a decade and a half behind FANG, you know, like all the companies I've worked at up until now are like a decade and a half behind what FANG is, you know? And there's all the opportunity over there. So, you know, it's like, kind of answer Shirag's question. I'll give him two answers. One, you need more engineers per scientist on average. The number I've heard is you need about 2 engineers per data scientist, just as a function of the job. Because engineers need to push stuff into production a lot more. So is it more secure than a data science job? More than more secure, I would say there are more opportunities to become an engineer than there are to become a scientist, just as a function of how, like, you know, the job market works. Data analyst, because a data engineer who knows how to program in a backend language like Java, for example, can switch into software engineering, or you can reword your LinkedIn to say software engineering -data, and then recruiters will hit you up for software engineering jobs. I would say in that sense, you're more secure. But that's much more about how you finesse your resume. Which, if anyone knows my channel, knows my philosophy, I'm very much in favor of finessing your resume. As long as you arrive on day one and you can execute, that's all that really matters, in my opinion. So I think of the 3 positions, you are probably the most secure in engineering, but not by some like huge margin to where I'd choose a career over it. Yeah. In the sense that, like, if you want to be a data like if you care more about the business, you should become an analyst. And if you want to make a lot of money, become an analyst, go into management. If you care, if you're very academic by nature, data science is more probably, a good option for you. That being said, you'll probably also need a master's or a PhD, quite honestly. And otherwise, there's always engineering.
Yeah, and you do not need a master's to do engineering. Most people honestly just have a bachelor's.
Anyone below the age of 40, I don't think I've seen a master's degree. I can go on forever about my opinion of the college system, so I'll leave it at that.
Tell us what's the truth about college. I think that's kind of how I feel too, and I also think it's like things will change. That's what's going to happen. Like I said, in the last 10 years, things have massively changed. What a data engineer does has massively shifted. Will ChatGPT or something similar impact it? Probably, but will we still need someone to do the work? Also, yes. So
the work you do will just become more advanced, right? Yeah, Look, there was in the 1990s, right? Python didn't exist. It was invented in 98 or something like that. Yeah. Something like that, right? And it wasn't a popular language until fairly recently, when it became huge because of data. What Python has a similar effect that ChatGPT does, in my opinion, to software engineering, in the sense that if anyone has ever seen C, I think in C you have to make your own maps. For anyone not familiar, a map is a dictionary. You have to make your own dictionaries in C. Like, you have to define the code that creates them. Python has drastically abstracted low-level coding away to where it hasn't reduced the number of software jobs or jobs that need coding. It's drastically increased them, and made it to where we just expect people to get more work or get more valuable work done faster. And even the speed disadvantage that happens in Python, people are working every day to reduce that. So I would even say if you want to see what ChatGPT will do to software engineering and data analytics and stuff like that, look at what Python did to software engineering. Python didn't reduce the number of software engineering jobs; it drastically increased the number of engineering jobs out there. Because when you work in software, you're not working in meat space. So, for example, it costs $100 million to launch a rocket, or $50 million or something to launch a rocket. It does not cost nearly that much to launch anything, launch useful software, So I think I understand the concern that people have. I think these GPT softwares are really just going to drastically increase the amount of work people can get done, and therefore increase the amount of work that is demanded to get done, and therefore actually increase the job market size. What will reduce the job market size, in my opinion, is interest rates. The Federal Reserve, no matter what country you live in, dictates your economic well-being. Because at the end of the day, let's say you live in India, right? India doesn't pay for its oil in Indian rupees. They pay for their oil in US dollars. And the Federal Reserve's interest rate drastically affects how easy it is to get those, US dollars, in order to pay the Gulf states for oil, for example. And the reason I bring that in is just to make sure that everyone's aware that US Federal Reserve interest rates do affect the job market everywhere. So that's something I would keep an eye out on. But I don't think GPT is going to be a significant negative on anyone who's reasonably skilled at their jobs in the tech space.
I like that you brought up the Python thing, because it's one of those things that reduce the barrier to entry, right? Your intelligence level and the amount of time you used to take to learn programming was massive, right? And now you get to Python, like you said, you're a map, is a hash map. What are these things? What's a heap? What's a stack? All these things that if you learn programming in Java, if you learn programming in C, even more so, right? Like you had to build some of these things, and you had pointers if you were coding in like C++ or C. So there were so many extra layers that just get abstracted away. And yes, you reduce speed, but the trade-off is you still improve productivity because more people can now do that work. I always view Python kind of like some sort of like almost chainsaw, right? It's like, okay, before, in order to cut down trees, you needed to have like the strength. You need to be strong enough to carry an axe and whack it down, or at least the amount you could get paid was based off of how fast you were. So bigger people would, get paid more because they were likely stronger. And then you get a chainsaw, and it's like, okay, most people can carry this. You don't have to be super strong, maybe a little more skill, but like other than that, it's like they're just done, So, and then add in the machines now that just like cut it, like whatever. It's just Point being that's kind of how I view it. It's like a digital machine. So,
one great comparison I've heard, right, is gold, right? Like if you want to mine gold for today, like in the modern world, right? There are no large gold deposits left on the planet. Like a deposit that you or I could go and get a pickaxe and like dig out, right? Those veins of gold are mostly all gone. So you would think, oh, that means that less gold is being mined today than was, 500 years ago. Not true at all. We are mining more gold today than we've ever been mining as a human civilization. What happened? Instead of mining large chunks of gold, we get microscopic particles of it by hiring like 1 billion scientists and engineers and workers and all the requisite machines to do that work, to mine large swaths of land and get these microscopic bits of gold. And then you have to build an entire supply chain to, make use of that gold, right? I think that's what's happening in the data world. Like a lot of the really easy stuff has been taken care of, but all that means is now you need way more people to get work done, but you can still scale that work and make a lot of money doing it. And if you can do that, then jobs are going to be available.
Yeah. Are you using Copilot or ChatGPT?
I use both of them. They're very, very useful. I will give you guys a pro tip though. Don't let GPT, don't like fall asleep at the wheel with GPT. It's like those guys that like you saw would like use Tesla autopilot and then like not pay attention to the road and then are surprised that they end up in an accident. Yeah. That's basically what GPT-3 is. Like there are certain tasks it's quite good at, but if you have it write large sections of your code and it doesn't work, you'll spend more time debugging code you don't understand than had you just written it out yourself. So I find that GPT-3, or GPT-4 even, if you give it a small box and say like, okay, here's the exact thing I need, and you're more and more precise with it, you'll get better results. Or for example, sometimes code I need written out is very long, like it's physically verbose, especially like in data analytics, like you write a lot of verbose code because you're like doing one thing after another to data. Typing that out in GPT, even if I know all the steps and I have them all in my head, by typing out the command or by typing out what I need in GPT-3, it'll physically write that script faster than I can actually type it out, So I found for those two things are pieces of advice I'd give. Don't fall asleep at the wheel, be very precise, and use it to write very verbose code.
Yeah, I think that's one of the interesting thoughts that I've had with like more complex requests. It's like, when does that more complex request become more difficult to try to verbalize like what you want to do correctly, right? Than just writing it yourself, right? I will say though, like it's just this small thing, but like I, for example, I almost like purposely don't memorize how to do certain things in code because I'm like, I can always Google this. So I was like adding a timestamp to the end of a file name, right? And I was like, I wonder if I can just like comment in my code, like the code below, add a timestamp to the end of a file name, and then it's like, oh, okay, yeah, here's the rest of it.
Copilot is really like Copilot is scary. It's really good.
Yeah, it's like here's the rest of it. It's like, oh, so I just have to comment code, and then it like goes into existence. Yeah.
Oh yeah.
It's like so that's really nice.
What does that mean, right? Now you churn through work faster, and then you just get more work. That's
always the joke, right? Like there's always more work. There's always like in the data world, guys, we'll always be migrating every few years. So don't worry. There's always the next tool that everyone's going to use that some vendor swears this time it's going to like solve all of this company's problems.
Yeah.
It inevitably doesn't. And then we have to spend the rest of the few years trying to make it do that thing. That's engineering.
Oh
welcome
yeah.
to engineering. We're all just trying to play catch up. I mean, like, right, like Airflow, right? Like you brought up Airflow, and Airflow I think was made public in 2015, which is not long ago, right? I mean, it's almost a decade ago, but it's not long ago in the grand scheme of things. And we were like 3 years ago, everyone's like, okay, Airflow has all these problems, and that makes sense. It was like the first massively adopted like orchestrator that like was Python based. I'm sure there were others, and there was always GUI versions of like orchestrators, but a lot of people would just custom build these things. So every company just had their own. In fact, everyone always has a story that's like, oh yeah, I built an Airflow thing at my company. I'm like, okay, yes, everyone's built one at some point, but it was the first like massively adopted one that was like code based. But someone can correct me if I'm wrong. So then now you're seeing like everyone's like, oh well, now there's Mage, and now there's Prefect, and now there's like, you know, all these other options that are kind of coming out there. So, you know, well, and they're like, oh, we swear this is way better. All those problems you had with Airflow, we don't have. And it's like, yes, you've now like indexed heavily on solving those problems, but you likely have new problems. Maybe some that Airflow doesn't have, or maybe some that, you know, maybe now you don't have Airflow problems, but you have your problems. So it's just,
I could see at
constant.
a sufficiently large company managing Airflow could be a full-time job, honestly,
Oh, yeah.
or like close to one, you know?
Yeah. Like at Facebook, we had Dataswarm, which is like Airflow's V1, before they went to Airbnb and built it and then open sourced it. And yeah, like you had a Dataswarm ops team. That was their job, was just managing this Dataswarm instance. Because that thing was managed, like our team alone had like thousands of jobs. So if you like, there were probably hundreds of thousands of like data jobs going on at Facebook in a day. So yeah, eventually you just need like 10 people to like manage that whole situation.
If you guys want confidence in the industry, I don't know if anyone's familiar with Southwest Airlines. It's one of the biggest American airlines, one of the biggest airlines in America. And they multiple times in the last 3 years have had just major IT system, like massive failures. Like, I don't know if we're allowed to curse on this channel, but it's just like the most embarrassing, just like explosions of like IT incompetence. And it's because the company has not invested in their IT systems in decades, you know, like when you use Expedia.com, Expedia is okay, but when you use Expedia, right, it's a generally nice looking interface, very slick and everything. But the back end of that is this old ass system that's like decades old.
Sabre?
Yeah. Sabre, and there's like one other one. They've improved it, but none of the airlines have been incentivized in their own minds to actually take on the improvements, right? Because like, oh yeah, why invest in that? Why invest in that? And the FANG world, right? Like of like these companies that are like born in technology have leapfrogged them many generations, and now the average customer is aware of that. You know, there was a time when the average person did not care much about technology. Now everyone cares about technology. So now the expectation is, hey, Southwest, why is this stuff failing so badly? And people are now aware of back-end systems in a way that they weren't back in the 90s. And I think the mass market awareness of, oh, there's an entire IT backend, this stuff's complicated, is going to create an explosion of jobs in this industry as companies that have not invested in their stuff for years realize that they need to invest in it now. They need to build better systems. And Facebook, Netflix, Amazon, Google, these companies have set the bar for what the average customer expects. I was using Hulu the other day, like the Hulu app on my Samsung TV. And I understood why Netflix engineers get paid $500,000 a year. The Hulu app was just a freaking disaster. Laggy, barely worked, no animations, was ugly as hell. And I'm like, oh, so this is what happens when you pay your engineers like, you know, $80K a year probably, or something like that, you know? You don't incentivize people to do better.
You don't, and yeah, exactly. There's that lack of ownership. I mean, it's not. I won't say it's lack of ownership, but there's people who probably still own things there. That's probably not fair to say. It's just like at the same time, if you're not, especially if you know someone else is making $500K and you're getting paid maybe 100, like you're gonna be like, that's all I need to do. Like, and I wouldn't like. That's how I'd be. I'd be like, yeah, this is.
You get what you pay for. You get what you pay for. You know.
I have a life. I'm not gonna sit here and try to like save my job because like at Netflix, you know, you can definitely lose your job.
Like if you pay me $500K, you can own my life. That's different. You know, it's all yours. I'm cool with that. But yeah, I mean for $80K, like, you know, I got a life, you know, I got other stuff to do too.
And you have options. It's like there are other options of 80K jobs I can take. But like
Yeah.
when it comes to like 500K jobs in the tech space, it's like there is a limited pool of these jobs. It can feel like a lot of people make it, but it's really not that many people. So yeah,
The people who make it advertise the fact that they make it in some way, shape, or form.
Ex Facebook, ex Google, ex Netflix engineer. Yes,
So
so yeah, I mean, we can do a quick Q&A. I don't want you to take you too long. I'm sure you're getting late on the evening. Do you have any plans for tonight? Before we
no, it's got to go back to work. I have some on-call stuff I have to deal with, some stuff I want to deploy. So
all right. Well, we'll try not to keep you to that. I don't see if anyone has any questions. Let me know. But I'll there's a few at least I can start with. So what's the next most important thing I need to learn for data engineering? So they already know SQL and Python. Any free resources or books you'd recommend?
I would say learn how to work with cloud systems. So be generally familiar with what tools are available on GCP, so Google Cloud Platform, Azure, and AWS, and not all the tools. You know, just stuff like Apache Airflow, like EC2, S3. Like, be aware of what these terms are, what they mean. I think AWS has like over 200 tools or something, it's some insane number basically. Wow. No one uses all of them. No. Certified cloud architects have no idea what half these tools are, like in any meaningful way. Yeah. There's maybe like 10 tools that if you're like aware of what they do, you will have the knowledge necessary to add value to your career. So I think most companies in some way, shape, or form are moving to or are on the cloud, and deploying stuff in a cloud is very different from deploying stuff in some server that you own. And because of that, I think some familiarity with these technologies would be a useful next step. And that might mean getting the base level AWS certification. It won't get you a job or anything, but the certification structures out your learning and gives you an opportunity to, really put together a study guide of like what to actually study. So I think cloud technologies is what I would argue you should learn about.
Yeah, I think cloud's definitely usually the next step I'll recommend as well. It's like, yeah, pick up your SQL, pick up your coding. You can add some data warehousing kind of concepts in there as well. There's always like you can just look up Kimball's book. I think you can generally find it for free. Kimball data warehousing PDF free.
Data modeling, learn like what's a snowflake schema, star schema, stuff like that. Some basic stuff like that's also useful.
Yeah. It's always interesting because like at Facebook, sometimes we maybe use the terms of snowflake modeling, but because of how sometimes the data was actually stored, it was like, no, we just store every date partition. So slowly change the dimensions and we just have every date partition like saved. So you just go to that date in history and join on that date. And it was very, very interesting. Very, very different approach to traditional. Let's see. Here. So Andy wanted to ask, are you still learning Scala?
In the background, very lightly. The difficult part is that there isn't an application for it at my current job because Scala is, and I'm making a broad statement here. Scala is kind of only really useful if you already have all the basics covered with your data engineering build out, and now you're like trying to squeeze performance out of Spark. You're trying to like squeeze performance out of, I don't know if Snowflake uses Scala in the backend or not, but out of Spark, for example. So I do want to go back to learning it, but currently it is very difficult to find the motivation for it because there are so many other things that I could spend my time learning. And I can't work on any scalable systems that use Scala at my job currently. There just isn't anything to do, Yeah.
Yeah, it's just kind of like trying to learn a language without having one to like communicate with it. It just doesn't make the right brain connections.
Like back when I was unemployed, what feels like eons ago, but it was just 5 years ago. I was completely like unemployed and not particularly employable. I would teach people in China English over WeChat, but the value I gave is that I didn't teach them grammar or anything. I gave them an American accented English person to speak to and corrected the way they said things, the accent they use things. So for example, like one common mistake a lot of people from China make is that they don't say usually, like the zh sound is difficult to say. They say usually.
Interesting.
So correcting stuff like that, for example. And the reason I bring that up, right, is that a lot of them knew English, but because there are a limited number of English accented or American accented people available in China, the actual like execution of the speaking was very difficult for people, even if they knew all the concepts and everything. So that's kind of the place I'm at with Scala right now. I have an understanding of how the language works. I finished the course and everything, but I don't know what to do with it, you know? So I'm thinking about doing Java, quite honestly, because at my company, like our entire stack is built off of Java, like from the backend services perspective, and I can actually like do something with that, you know?
Yeah. How late can you stay? Can you stay for 10 minutes extra?
Yeah, no, I got time.
All right, cool. Here, let's see. Is it best to start as an analyst and upskilling to get into data engineering? Any thoughts there?
That's one method to go about it. I would say when you start as an analyst, right, you definitely are like fighting perception to get into engineering. And now that I'm an engineer, I understand why. I used to hate it when I was an analyst, and I still think it's like annoying, but I understand why, because I remember at my previous job, like engineers would always assume I didn't know how to code. And because it was hard to fight that perception, I was like, no, I know how to code. I can like execute this thing. Just tell me like what needs to be done. So I will definitely say it is an upstream battle to do that versus, for example, say you just got a CS degree. Not that it's impossible, just that, Ben brought up earlier, like, transitioning laterally within your company's one strategy. For me, I actually transitioned out of my company by talking about the experience that I had at my current company in a certain way, right? Like messaging is something that's very important in interviews. What do you want to like advertise to people? What do you talk to people about? How do you advocate for yourself? And like I always say, as long as you can get there on day one and execute, that's what really matters.
Yes. Remind me, is Emory? Emory, is that a what's that type of college called?
Liberal arts.
Yes, is that a liberal arts college?
Yeah.
Well, the reason I'm asking is you brought up messaging, and I think I was just hearing something where like this guy was like, "Oh yeah, rich people, why do they send their kids to liberal arts colleges? Is because like they learn how to communicate, and that's such a valuable skill." So just a quick moment.
I don't think the liberal arts portion of Emory taught me that. It was a business school, so Emory has one of the best BBA programs in the country. And my friends were all part of that BBA program. So there's a lot of really basic stuff they teach you over there that, for example, so I conduct interviews at my company. I think I counted last week. I've done over 40 interviews of different candidates. So like I'm, reasonably well-versed in like the interviewing process from the other end of it. One thing I was very surprised about is I've only ever received one thank you email from a candidate. I'm not saying if you send me a thank you email, all of a sudden you're going to, if you fail the coding interview, you're going to like streamline through it. But it's not at all uncommon where we have like 3 different candidates that are all like within 10% of each other, and we don't really know where to go with it. The candidate that sent the thank you email like is going to be like, I'm like, okay, there's some excitement over here. Like that stuff matters. So at the end of the day, the interviewing process is not unbiased. It is a very human process. And obviously, we try what we can to remove as much prejudice bias as possible from the interview. But it's still a human process in the sense that like if you're nicer to someone, if you smile at them, like if you seem really crabby in the interview, even if you're like a perfect candidate, it is going to be difficult to pass that person. Because you're just not going to wanna. Like I interviewed someone fairly recently, and this person had done all the questions well, but I wasn't a big fan of this person's attitude. Meanwhile, someone else was very, polished and did all the questions and everything, right? And at the end of the day, it's a human process, right? So I have to want to work with this person. I forgot what the question was.
No, I was just asking about liberal arts and messaging. That's all.
So BBAs, yeah.
Yeah, we can go back. So you brought up certificates earlier, and I have my own thoughts. But how much do certificates add value to a resume? So that's kind of the overall question, really.
Oh man. Okay. So this is a question that I would actually backtrack on an opinion I've spread for years now. What I used to say is that a certificate added no value to your LinkedIn profile or your resume. Again, unless you're like maybe like Salesforce or like, like these like really structured like, Salesforce, like Oracle, that's a little bit different. I'm talking about like, AWS or Azure, for example, right? I read an article recently, and make of that what you will. There's an article written about literally every opinion out there. But this article talked about how it certificates can be negative signaling in the job market, because the idea is, and again, remember, this is all a human process, right? Like there's ATS and everything, but at the end of the day, there's a lot of humans involved. The certificate can make it seem like, oh, this person needs to prove that they can do the job versus just having the experience. I'll let you guys make of that what you will. Look up, if you want to find the article, I think you can look up like negative signaling certificate, and the article might pop up. So I see certificates as valuable in helping you structure out your learning. And if you don't have traditional qualifications, quite honestly, you have nothing to lose by putting a certificate on. Now, after you have some experience in the industry, I've been offered certificates, like free certificates from like vendors, for example, like Snowflake and stuff. I don't bother. I'm not gonna put the time into, like, I was really excited to like get to do it. Then I'm like, I saw how much work it was, and I'm like, no one cares, because I have actual experience that I can talk about on my resume. So once you become an experienced candidate, I think it stops. Not only does it stop mattering, it might be negative signaling, quite honestly. But if you have no experience and you have no like traditional qualifications, such as like prior experience or like a college degree, you have nothing to lose, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think the one thing to add there is like, and this was something I didn't learn until I started doing consulting, is like, if you want to become better partners with these vendors, they do like you to have like usually like 2, 3, 4, 6 certificates. And like generally once you start hitting like the next level, it's like you have to have 2 people on your team that have X amount of certificates. So yes, overall, like, I think I kind of agree with you said, but like the interesting thing that I eventually learned is like, oh yeah, there's like a weird value to certificates if you consult. And if you're trying to get like the vendors to send you like possible prospects, because they're like, well, if you've learned our stuff, we'll happily send you people. So, but if you're not, if you're in your shoes, it's better to talk about what you do, not about what you got certificates.
If y'all want to know some like inside baseball as well, something I discovered fairly recently. Let's say you sign a contract with, I'm gonna use a random vendor. I don't know. I don't want to
Databricks, Snowflake.
No, because then I'd be
Astronomer.
Let's say, so we don't use Astronomer. So let's say you sign a contract with Astronomer, right? And they have some certification or something. I found out that what happens, when you sign a software contract, everything is negotiable, because software is marginal zero cost to deploy to other people, basically. So you can negotiate the cost up, down, all around terms. Everything can be negotiated, basically. And people do negotiate everything. So when you sign the contract with them, I found out that what happens is a lot of these, like a lot of times the salespeople will offer, they'll say, like, oh, we'll throw in training, we'll throw in certifications, we'll throw in conference passes. And what happens is the training will be like charged at a retail price, $3,000, $4,000, $5,000. You go to the training and you're like, this is not you cannot legitimately charge $3,000 in the open market to this. And I'm like, oh, what they did is they gave us 3 free certifications and trainings, and told us they knocked $9,000 off the price, or said like, oh, we gave you $9,000 worth of certifications for free. So a little bit of inside baseball as to what I kind of discovered certifications can be for companies. It's a way to help salespeople sell the product by saying, oh, we also gave you $10,000 of training.
Yeah, it's kind of like the like a lot of information courses where it's like, and we added this $10,000 like mini course, and this 5,000. Like, who's coming up with these numbers? Like,
it's someone just like pulled it out of nowhere. Like, I'm like, that was not a $3,000 training.
No. Okay, so we were talking about. Oh wait, this is the one. Sorry, I'm not trying to. I wanted to see where's the. Oh, this one. Sign-on bonuses. Just because we're talking about negotiations. What's your thoughts there? What's your experience between negotiating starting pay versus sign-on bonus?
Sign-on bonus is way easier to negotiate. So I've been lucky that the last 2 jobs I've gotten signing bonuses. They're way easier to negotiate. Usually,
and why is that?
I think it's because, well, for 2 reasons, right? One, let's use simple numbers, right? Let's say someone pays you $100,000, like that's your salary they're willing to pay you. If you negotiate them up to $110,000, your bonus also goes up as well, like your regular yearly bonus, because your bonus is a percentage of your starting salary. So there's cascading costs associated with increasing someone's salary. If a year down the line you do very well, they give you a performance increase on your salary, that increase goes on your salary. So companies will do whatever they can to like try and like load that into your signing bonus, because the signing bonus is super cool, because like the cash just appears. Like you get a massive pot of cash within like a month or so of starting, right? With a signing bonus, you have no commitment to give the employee more money after that. And a number of companies on their signing bonuses will have terms that say there's a clawback agreement where if you leave within 2 years, and if it's written, somewhat fairly, they'll say, oh, we can claw back a prorated amount. If you leave 1 year, we'll take back half of it. If you leave 2 years, we'll take back the whole, none of it. If you leave immediately, we'll take back the whole thing, which I like the cliff idea. Like, I can understand if you leave after 6 months, a company might feel a little bit cheated on the signing bonus. So like, I can understand, okay, if you have a cliff, like if I leave within 6 months, take it all back, that's totally fine. I've had the 2 years thing written into contracts. I'm like, that's a bit ridiculous, honestly. Like, you've basically just given me a bonus for the next 2 years. Like, so what's your experience been when negotiating starting pay versus signing bonuses? Whenever I negotiated, these signing bonuses were significantly easier to negotiate. Early in your career, I think that's not that big of a deal because there's a decent chance you'll switch companies so rapidly anyways that a company may not even try and chase you with the signing bonus, right? Like they may just like not decide to enforce it. But if you can, and sometimes it's better to have cash today than cash tomorrow because you can take that signing bonus and put it immediately into like the stock market or something, So do the math on it, see what's right for you. Earlier in your career, I would say don't worry about negotiating like if they give you the signing bonus instead of like putting it on your salary. But in the long term, putting it on your salary is obviously better because everything you do at that company is now pegged to that salary.
And in general, the other issue companies kind of sometimes run into is that they have pay bands, right? And they don't want to make it look unfair. And if you ask for something and they're leveling you at one thing, and then you're like, no, but I want to make like $160,000. That was something I remember I was negotiating at Facebook. It's like, oh, I want to make X amount, per year. And they're like, well, we can't like get you there by your salary because if you did, you'd be out of the pay band, and they don't want to get sued. But we can, give you a larger bonus. And so I was like, okay, well, I'll take that for now. I mean, it was ridiculous. Like, it's Facebook. For me, that was again life-changing money in my perspective.
If you're getting signing bonuses, you're already negotiating a pretty hefty salary. So you're in a good position.
Let's see. I think someone asked something about as a fresher. As a fresher, should we go into data analyst role and then deep dive into data engineering concepts?
Depends on what you want, right? The way I like to split it, right, is because here's the thing. Look, money is great, but also remember, whatever you do in some way, shape, or form, you're going to be doing this for the next 50 years of your life, 40 years if you're 20, sorry. 40 years ago. I mean, obviously, you could have like career changes and stuff like that, but I don't know if I would plan my decision making off the fact that like, oh, I can like do a hard pivot into, I don't know, being a lawyer or something. Not saying it's not possible, just maybe that's not how you plan stuff. So ask yourself, right? Like I've known myself, you're probably about 20 years old at least. I've known myself for 20 years. What do I enjoy? Do I want to do like add like business value? Do I want to like analyze for the business? So a data analyst role, and if you want to make a lot of money, data analyst then convert into a manager is the way to go. I want to deploy. I like building things. I like putting stuff into production engineering, or I'm very academic. I like researching. I like reading a lot and answering very difficult, sticky questions. Then data science is probably your calling. Now, if the question is, how do I make the most money possible? Probably engineering. The absolute most money possible, get a master's or a PhD in something mathematical and become a quant. That's the actual most money. Or kind of do what, Seattle data guy, or to me, like what I did to a lesser extent, get good experience at companies that people respect and then become a consultant,
This is true. This is a great way to honestly, the thing there is that you start to realize that like, especially if you get the right types of clients, it's like what you perceive as a lot of money is not a lot of money to a lot of companies. Like I remember I was working on a recent project where they're like, yeah, we said like, I thought I asked for a ridiculous amount of money, what I would consider, or not ridiculous, but like a lot of money. And they're like, oh, you were like the lowest bid. And I was like, all right, like once again. So it's one of those things you just realize that like, if you can do your work really well, if you're driving value, like
people will pay you whatever. If you can drive commensurate value, people will pay you whatever. So
yeah, exactly. It like the numbers matter a little less, especially if you don't position it as hourly rates. As soon as you position things as hourly rates, people are eventually like, I don't know if I want to pay that much per hour. It's weird.
Right.
It's like you can say the same thing, same cost without an hourly rate. And people are like, that sounds fine. But if it's got like some hourly rate, they're like, that sounds like a lot of money. And you're like,
Oh, so do you generally do it like on the project basis?
generally some sort of like project retainer basis of some kind.
Okay.
It's just it's also more consistent in terms of like, then you know how much you're making.
Right.
I would constantly run into this problem before. And this was like why I couldn't quit Facebook for a long time, because, like, okay, I'm making $5,000 extra this month, maybe, or $7,000 next month. But you don't really know, kind of go up and down, because all your projects are kind of hourly and they're kind of going over whatever pace they're going at.
Right.
And then if you're making almost $300,000 on the other side, it's like, well, I can't quit this side. Like,
yeah,
the trade-off is terrible. But eventually kind of learning how to just have a different just having that mind shift and be like, oh, okay.
Consistency has a value to it too, even if you technically make less money.
Yes, obviously, but it's nice to make more. It is nice. But I don't want to keep everyone here too long. We're going on an hour and 15. So I don't think we have any more questions. So I think I can sign off. So thank you everyone for jumping on. Thanks so much, Shashank, for joining on. I think I think it'd be so fun to do more lives with you, because you just have so many little anecdotes in there, which is always fun.
Yeah. Well, I saw Osman over here recommended doing a resume live, a live resume review, which I think would be very interesting. I've been on the other side of the hiring poster. I don't know, the other side of the hiring table.
You're the interviewee or interviewer. Sorry,
interviewer. Yeah. So I could probably give you a decent idea of like. Now I will tell you, I'll tell anyone out there, resumes. The whole resume process is complete BS. Like it's very, very old school, and like it's BS that we all have to put up with. Because it is. I mean, how are you supposed to squeeze all your experience into a 2-second thing that like people can actually like, understand you? I would say invest a lot more time in your LinkedIn. Every job I've gotten in the last couple of years has been through LinkedIn. And at least in America, that's where like everything is. So
yeah. Like I think I ran 150 plus interviews at Facebook. I only opened up a resume if I was like, this person was interesting. And it didn't impact like, did they pass this interview or not? It was just like, who is this person? Like they either answered questions so well, or they just had like an interesting demeanor where you're like, all right, I'm curious.
I've only found VPs and up like always open the resumes, but also because if you get to a VP level interview, you're probably a very promising candidate,
Yeah. I imagine that's like the one place, or that's where it starts. It's like it matters at the beginning. It doesn't really matter in the middle, and it probably matters at the end again.
Exactly.
Kind of thing. So perfect. Awesome. Well, Shashank, I don't know. Do you have any final thoughts?
Not much. Just keep at it, everyone. I know it's a scary world out there right now from like a hiring perspective, but long story short, the core economics, and again, I can only talk about America, to be honest, right? I wish I could tell you how the Indian market's going to do, how the European market's going to do. I have zero idea. But with the American market, keep your chin up, grind and make sure that you pick up good skills to be valuable to a company. And the core logic of hiring tech people has not been lost on the industry yet. We still need way more people to accomplish all the stuff that we need to accomplish as a collective society, let's call it. So there's opportunities out there. And if you're having some bad luck, just keep at it and, see how you can improve your process every day.
Thank you. Okay, one more final thought, just because you said that. You just made me think like the whole LLM explosion. I'm already seeing people have like LLM expert consultant at like Accenture, like underneath their resume, and I'm like, you were not that. You were not that.
Consulting companies were the first ones to be like, Accenture, we have an entire team of LLM. What do you call them? Prompt engineering experts. They have 10 years of experience. Man. Guys, I guess if you are a management consultant, you've been a prompt engineer your entire life. So,
that's too funny. All right. Thank you all, and I'm gonna hit end broadcast. If you want to say thanks, Shashank, or
thank you, everyone, and I'll see you later.
See y'all later. I'm gonna hit end.